courtroom.
So just a couple of comments to get us started. I want to thank everyone for meeting virtually again today. As I mentioned in June, this mode of meeting is not necessarily conducive to the collaborative nature of our work, nor does it lend itself to the vigorous discussion and participation that we are accustomed to. I hope the time when we can meet again in person will be soon. Until then, I want to thank each of you for your patience and flexibility as we continue to adjust to this format. I know there were some difficulties the last time we convened in June, but staff has worked to make improvements so it's as easy as possible for you to not only join, but to participate in this meeting. If you had any technical difficulties during the meeting, please email Michelle at michelle.l.hall@nccourts.org or use the chat feature to send her a message. If you have any questions or concerns generally, please feel to send them directly to me or to Michelle. So there are a few housekeeping matters before we get into the substance of the agenda. Some of these housekeeping issues are just reminders, but I do want to let you know that this is a public meeting. The public is participating, and they are doing that not through the invitation links that you received, but instead through the judicial branch's YouTube channel. It doesn't allow for them to have an exchange of dialogue with us, but should any questions need to be directed to anyone or other staff or to fellow commissioners, staff is going to follow up after the meeting and share any responses in a subsequent email. For any member, any commissioner, I've tried to greet those of you that have your video on. If you're not sharing video, you're going to have to announce yourself before speaking. If you are sharing video, you don't need to do that before you speak. To be recognized for a comment, please use the chat feature in Webex to send a message to everyone or just to the host. You can use the e-hand in Webex, or you can just throw your hand up. Physically raise your hand. For a motion, you're going to have to make sure you're unmuted. Luther's going to be on top of you about that throughout the meeting, and state your name and the motion. Any votes will be conducted by a roll call. I'll restate the motion and who made the motion. I don't expect that we're going to have, except for one administrative vote today, so that laborsome task of a roll call is not going to be too tedious, and that's going to be just for the approval of the minutes, I forecast. Remember, we got an upcoming meeting on December the 4th. There's no reason to think that we're going to do it any way other than this, unfortunately. But go ahead and mark your calendar for 2021. We got meeting dates that are now they've been released. That is approved, set in stone, etched in stone. March the 5th, June the 4th, September the 10th, and December the 3rd for 2021. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that we're coming to the end of structured sentencing's 25th anniversary year. It started off in a very celebratory way. We find ourselves in a really different place now, dealing with situations that none of us could have predicted. I continue to feel proud of the state and structured sentencing. I'm looking at Susan in my grid view here. Proud of the contributions of the commission, and proud of the important work that's occurred and will occur during not only the pandemic, but also during a time of heightened scrutiny of the criminal justice system. I hope that you as members of the commission feel similarly, and you will continue to find ways that this commission and structured sentencing can help address issues going forward. I want to turn it over now to Michelle, again, continuing with the housekeeping for a tutorial on WebEx. Michelle?
Good morning. Thank you, Judge Brown. I'm going to quickly share a PowerPoint presentation that's going to provide a very brief overview of some key Webex features. Of course, our timing is perfect in that we just had a Webex update earlier this week, so things look a little bit different. But this, and thanks to Rebecca for helping me in this two-person meeting yesterday, put this together. But you can see along the bottom here are some of the key functions that you'll need: mute and unmute, start or stop your video, and then the red X would be to leave the meeting at the end. These three dots here will give you some more options in terms of your audio connection. So if you're having any issues with your computer audio, that'll allow you to switch to a phone and vice versa. You can also access some of these features in another place, which I'll show in just one second. At the bottom right, you can click participants and chat if you want to change what's showing on the right sidebar here. Those are your two options there. And then this is the chat function where you can chat everyone. You can select a specific person from the drop-down list, or you can chat the host, which will automatically be listed at the top. Here's the participant list, and you'll notice if you hover over your name, there's a little hand. And if you press that, your name will turn blue, and then the host will be able to see that you have your hand raised. And you can also hover over any participant to chat them. And for yourself, you can mute and unmute from over in the participant list as well. Up at the top right, this is where you'll find a couple of options for how to view the screen. So we would suggest using the gallery view, which allows you to see the most people at the same time, and that's the one on the left here. And there are a couple of other options. You can pin the speaker, you can have a floating panel, but that's where you'll access those options. And then lastly, I just want to point out that for some of the presentations, you will have the option to zoom in or zoom out using this little sidebar on the left. So if something's too small or too big for you, you can just use these magnifying glasses to tailor it to your preference. And that is just a quick overview of some of the key features for today.
Michelle, you'll allow me to call it something other than gallery view. I've heard it grid view. I've heard it Brady Bunch view.
Yeah, sorry, actually grid view is probably correct. I don't know what possessed me to say gallery, but yes, I prefer Brady Bunch myself.
All right. So now we're going to transition this housekeeping process into the our introductions, which will simultaneously include approval of the minutes. So I'm going to solicit a motion. You received a draft, should have, by email. If there's no discussion, I'll hear from the group.
Move it be approved.
There's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I've got Luther Moore as making the motion that the minutes as submitted to the body should be approved. I did not catch who seconded the motion.
Fitch.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. So I'll now turn it over to Michelle, and she'll go through this roll call procedure that we're doing through this virtual format.
Oh. Okay. If everyone could try to make sure that you're muted, except for when you're talking, there's been a couple of instances of background noise. So I'll try to stay on top of that as well. As Judge Brown said, I'm going to call everyone's name. So here's a list of the entire commission membership, and I'm going to check your name off as I call it when we hear you respond. And if I don't check your name, that might be an indication that either you're not unmuted or there's some other audio technical difficulty. So I'll start with Judge Brown.
Aye.
Francis Battle,
Aye.
Art Beeler, Sheriff Clemens,
Aye.
Senator Daniel, Louise Davis,
Aye.
Danielle Elder, Judge Elliott,
Aye.
Representative Faircloth, Senator Fitch,
Aye.
Willis Fowler, and I know Mary Stevens is attending on his behalf.
Yes.
Lindsay Granados,
Aye.
Judge Horn,
Aye.
Susan Castle-Nelson, Chief King,
Aye.
Maureen Kruger, Tammy Lee,
Yes.
Dr. McMurray,
Aye.
Representative McNeil, Jim Mixon,
Aye.
Luther Moore, Tim Moose,
Aye.
James
Aye.
Morrison.
I was on mute.
Aye.
Oh, okay. I got you, Luther. Thank you. Representative Richardson,
Yes, ma'am. I came in a little late. What are we voting on?
the minutes, approval of the minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Senator Steinberg, Calvin Stuber,
Aye.
Patrick Weed,
Aye.
Judge Zachary.
Aye.
Thank you. And if you didn't get checked, message me if you need help with your audio.
Yes, Art Biller said aye.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, there was a lot of feedback at certain points, so I may not have been able to hear everybody.
Michelle, same here. I said aye, and I am here.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Thanks.
Representative
I'll turn it back
McNeil
to
is
you,
here.
Judge Brown.
Judge Brown.
Okay, thank you, Representative McNeil. I got you. Thank you.
Neil, I got you. Thank you.
Yeah, it takes a village, guys. Apparently, I'm guilty of forgetting to mute myself in these meetings frequently, and it's a common mistake, but this apparently, at least this platform is so sensitive that if just one more of us has it unmuted, we get an echo. And so, Art, let's stay on top of that. You tell us when we got it wrong. So at this point, before we get into the substance of the agenda, it's my pleasure to make a couple of introductions. Senator Milton Toby Fitch Jr. I have his bio in hand. I've had it, Senator Fitch, in anticipation that we would have had a chance to recognize you as a fellow commissioner. And I'm thrilled that we're able to do that today. I'm disappointed that I'm not there to do anything other than virtually shake your hand and welcome you. So, Senator Fitch was born and reared in Wilson, North Carolina, and graduated from North Carolina Central University with his BS in 1969 and his JD in 1972. He was admitted to both the North Carolina and the District of Columbia Bar Association. Senator Fitch was appointed Superior Court Judge for District 7B-C in December of 2001 and retired as the Senior Resident Superior Court Judge in February of 2018. Prior to his judgeship, he served 9 terms in the North Carolina House, representing Wilson and Edgecombe counties. He was also the first African American in the state of North Carolina to preside over the House. He's the first majority whip and the first African American to be elected House Majority Leader. Senator Fitch was a founding member of the North Carolina Legislative Black Caucus. He was the most worshipful Grand Master of the Grand Lodge jurisdiction of North Carolina, Incorporated, from 2003 until 2018. For many years, Senator Fitch has devoted considerable skills and talents to serving the people of Wilson, Edgecombe, and Nash counties, and the state of North Carolina. He's a member of the Mount Heron Masonic Lodge number 42 and a lifetime member of the NAACP. Senator Fitch is the proud father of Melanie and Milton Fitch III. It is my pleasure to recognize Senator Fitch as one of our fellow commissioners on the Sentencing and Policy Advisory Commission. Welcome, Senator Fitch. And we have another introduction to be made. I received the notice from the Chief Justice acknowledging that our new commissioner, Attorney Lindsay Granados, she's joined us. I've not spotted her yet in my Brady Bunch view, but I'll be looking for you in a minute there, Ms. Granados. She's a native of Seminole, Oklahoma. She graduated from Oklahoma Baptist University, which is located in Shawnee, Oklahoma, with a bachelor's degree in political science. She was a magna cum laude graduate. Ms. Granados holds a JD from Stetson University College of Law in Gulfport, Florida. She's licensed to practice in state court here in North Carolina, and also licensed to practice in federal court in both the Eastern and Middle Districts of North Carolina. Currently, Ms. Granados is the Senior Associate Attorney at the law offices of Wiley Nickel, where she handles the entire gamut of criminal defense cases, from criminal traffic tickets to high-level felonies. In addition to serving as defense counsel for over a decade, Ms. Granados has also served the citizens of Wake County as an assistant district attorney. Given your now 10 years, Ms. Granados, in private practice, I assume that was during the Willoughby era, but you might already know, if you don't, you should know that the current Wake County DA, Lauren Freeman, has a link to us and you now as a commissioner, in that she, in a prior professional capacity, was a staff member on our Sentencing Commission. Ms. Granados is the current president of the Wake Women's Attorneys having served 2 prior years as the vice president. She's the immediate past president of the Wake County Academy of Trial Lawyers, and she serves on the Wake County Bar Association's CLE committee. She's an active member of North Carolina Advocates for Justice. Additionally, for the past decade, Ms. Granados has volunteered as the co-chair of the North Carolina Advocates of Justice High School Mock Trial Competition, a wonderful assembly, running a regional competition for high school students learning about our system of laws. So please join me in welcoming our new commissioner, who is taking the place of our long-serving commissioner, Chris Fialco, who has provided the commission with valuable insight over many years. Got big shoes to fill, but you're up to the task, Commissioner Granados. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to working with all of you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
So at this point, I'm going to just review the agenda quickly, and we will get underway. I'll kind of warn you, the agenda is full, but I'll also put you at ease. We will be done by noon. So first off, we will have a staff presentation as a legislative session summary and its impact. Then we will have a presentation to include a prison population and projection update, commissioners and staff. And then we'll have a juvenile resource projection update, which will include representatives of the juvenile justice as well as staff. And then we've got staff and Jesse Scholler for the statewide misdemeanor confinement program, who will make a presentation on its capacity projection. And we know that Representative McNeil pays particular focus to that, and we appreciate that emphasis that he brings to our duties. And then finally, we're going to get into an opportunity for maybe some discussion by all of us, because we have something that I'm looking forward to, and we saved a great part of our agenda for last. That's going to be a review and discussion of this new task force on racial equity in criminal justice, and where our commission has a role in that task force. And we have one of our esteemed commissioners, Sheriff Clemens, who's a member of that task force, that will participate in our staff presentation on that topic, which will lead to a facilitated discussion. So that is where we are with the contents of our agenda. And at this point, I will recognize John Madler as our first staff presenter on this legislative session summary. John.
Okay, thank you, Judge Brown. Good morning, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to share my screen here just to bring up a couple of slides. Considering I was supposed to be concluding at this point, feeling the pressure, but I think we can get through it. Fortunately, this was a very light session as far as criminal justice was concerned. So we want to start our meeting with just a quick overview of some of the bills that passed during the session related to your work. You may recall the session started back in April and ran until July. Then they adjourned briefly. Then they returned last week for a short session and then adjourned for the year. Now, at the June meeting, we reviewed a number of the bills that had passed already. Most of them were related to COVID relief. There have been a couple of bills that have passed since then. That's what we just wanted to highlight for you right now. I'll go over some of the provisions real briefly, and then Jenny Hefner is going to talk briefly about the impact that might have on the criminal justice system. You should have received a report in your mail that is the ratified bills from the 2020 session. I want to thank Becky Whitaker and Megan Boyd Ward of our staff for preparing these materials for us. Like I said, I'm going to just give a very high level summary of what's in there, but you have the the report. It has more detail for each of the bills. And you also can go to the General Assembly website. You look at the bills themselves as well as staff summaries for that. So first thing I want to mention is just 2 new offenses that passed this year, felony offenses. You find that on page 1 of your report. And both of these are rather limited in the scope, in their application. The first one deals with the sex offender who's living in North Carolina, but who has a conviction from another jurisdiction, whether it's another state or federal jurisdiction. They are required to register if their offense is substantially similar as to a North Carolina reportable offense. And that was somewhat automatic, but this year there was a federal court case that said that that's a question of law that should be decided by a judge. So now they're entitled to a review of their offense before they have to register. If they willfully fail to have the review and fail to register, then they're violating the failure to register offense, which is a Class F felony. That took effect August 1st of this month, or last month. And as I said, it only applies to those who are in North Carolina who have a reportable conviction from another jurisdiction. So it's a very limited group. And just to mention the legislative review that you do, this was not an offense that the Commission got to review. This was added to the bill after your June meeting. Okay, the second offense to mention is simply a Bipartisan Elections Act, and this is creating a new felony offense that prohibits certain persons from sending or providing an absentee ballot to someone who has not requested it. This is a Class I felony, but again, this one also is limited to a person who is a member of the state board or any county board of election, or who is an employee of the state board or county board of election. So again, another small group of possible violators. And this one the Commission did review, and you found it to be consistent with your offense classification criteria. So those are the only 2 new felony offenses in there. We don't have any new misdemeanor offenses, so it was very light as far as new offenses go. Second area I want to talk about is just one punishment change, and that is North Carolina's First Step Act. This only applies to people who are convicted of drug trafficking or conspiracy to traffic. And what it does is, you know now, those people are sentenced to a mandatory fine and a mandatory minimum punishment in prison. This allows a judge to reduce the fine and also to sentence the person according to structured sentencing based upon their offense class and prior record level. First, the judge has a hearing, and there are a list in the statute of 11 different factors, and the judge has to find every one of those factors present. These factors tend to limit the application of this act. They deal with the offender, the offense itself, prior record, acts that the offender has done since then. Also looks at the general concepts of whether this would be a substantial injustice to impose the mandatory minimum, or whether it would threaten public safety if the judge did not impose the mandatory minimum. Now, this bill also has a provision that applies to people who are currently serving sentences for drug trafficking or conspiracy to traffic. They can apply for a motion, file a motion for appropriate relief, try and get resentenced under this act. And the AOC will be doing an annual report on who gets resentenced under this act. So it'll be interesting to see how much this is applied. Okay. 2 other bills that I want to just really quickly mention because they've been of interest to the Commission in a lot of your discussions here, and primarily they deal with juveniles. The first one is, again, House Bill 593. This has a section that essentially just moves all the offenders who are under 18 but who have been transferred to the adult system out of local jails and into juvenile detention facilities until they turn 18. So if someone has been transferred to the adult system and they're there pre-trial, they're there for a probation violation or an active sentence in the local jail, they would instead be placed in juvenile detention facilities. And this will help North Carolina be in line with federal legislation that will take effect next year that required the same thing, not to have juveniles in adult local jails. And as you remember with the prisons, there is a separate unit that they're using for all the youthful offenders, so that's not an issue for them. And then the last one I want to mention is simply the Second Chance Act. This bill does a number of things for expunction, which relates to some of the collateral consequence issues that you have talked about as a commission. But also, one of the things it does is that it provides an expunction option for offenders who are 16 or 17 at the time of their offense, but they committed their offense prior to raising the age of juvenile jurisdiction, so prior to December 1st of last year. Those folks, once they complete their sentence, if it was for a low-level felony or a misdemeanor, they will be eligible to apply for an expunction. And that'll put them in the same position as someone who has committed their offense after December 1st of last year, where they won't have a prior adult conviction to carry with them. So those are real quick highlights. Like I said, the details are in the report, and Judge Brown, happy to answer any questions, but otherwise, Jenny will talk about the potential impact of that.
Thank you, John. As we transition to Jenny's presentation, any questions from the commission to John? All right, Jenny?
Impact on the prison population in either direction from those changes. Typically, in order to have substantial impact, you would need a large number of convictions. You would also need to involve the more serious offense classes. Those tend to have higher impact due to the mandatory actives and sentence length. So we, again, aren't expecting to see substantial impact for those. Let me share my screen. One sec. Should be coming through. And what am I looking for? I'm trying to zoom in, but I have forgotten how to do it. Michelle, remind me.
Control+.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. What we have here is the prison population projection update. Usually every September, we give you an update on the accuracy of our last prison population projections, as well as just a look at the historical population and where we might be headed. Obviously, when we did our projections last year, we did not have a worldwide pandemic in mind in terms of the projections. So the projections are not as accurate as they typically are. They typically are within a 2% accuracy range, and that's what we like to look at for the first year of the projections. And we use a 5% accuracy range looking at the later years of the projection. So right now in this first graphic, what you can see right here is that our projection was 35,855, and our average population was 32,565. And if you have any trouble seeing the numbers, I believe on the left side of your screen, you've got the magnifying glass. In terms of the population for June, right now, I think we're all used to seeing that population being a lot closer to expanded operating capacity. And actually right now it is very close to standard operating capacity. And I think that historically, that's the first time that I'm aware of that it has been that close to standard operating capacity. In terms of the later years of the projection, obviously we will be adjusting projections to take into account changes that have occurred as a result of COVID-19. But if you look at this next chart, you can see that the lines between the actual average population, which is the blue line, and the projected population, which is the dashed greenish yellow line, that they typically track very closely to one another in terms of indicating the accuracy of the projections. But again, due to COVID-19, you can see that deviation with the population being lower than the projection by about 3,300 or about 10%. Looking at the next page, what you can see here is a long-term look at the prison population, going from really the impact of justice reinvestment in 2011 and some changes that occurred in criminal justice trends with them declining. And there were a few legislative changes that occurred in around the 15-16 timeframe. But since then, the population has been very stable over the past 3 fiscal years until the impact of COVID-19, which you can see hitting in March. The population for March was fairly normal because the governor's state of emergency and the Chief Justice's emergency directives in response to the pandemic, they didn't occur until midway through the month of March. So we don't really see much of an impact on the March numbers, but you can see the impact in the months following that. And so this next figure really just looks at the last 3 fiscal years. You can see with it a better comparison between the fiscal years looking at this chart, as well as if there's seasonality to the population, you would be able to see it here as well. So what we're looking at is the impact of COVID-19 resulted in declines in admissions, and there were also changes in releases. And there were multiple factors. One was that we had a postponement of court proceedings that occurred with the emergency directive, so we're not having people coming into the prison system. And in addition, there was also a moratorium by DPS on accepting offenders from the county jails from April to May. So we also didn't have offenders being transferred from the local jails to prison. So entries declined substantially from March to April. So March entries were around 2,000, and then entries dropped to 587 in April and 323 in May. And a more normal number is kind of the 1,900, 2,000 range. So that's quite a substantial decline in terms of the number of people who are being admitted to prison during that time frame. In addition, there were changes to releases and changes that would impact time served, one of which is Secretary Hooks invoked his statutory authority to authorize extended limits of confinement, or also known as ELC, that allows certain individuals to serve their sentences outside of prison, but under community correction supervision. And I believe that there are about 400 and some offenders who are doing that. In addition, there were some changes to discretionary time credits to allow offenders to be released closer to their minimum sentence, so taking some time off the maximum sentence down to the minimum. And then also incentive time credits were put into place, 3 days of credit per month available for certain offenders. Is Art saying 4 or 3? I said 3. 4? Okay. So anyway, to allow some offenders who are infraction free to earn additional time closer down to the minimum sentence. Now, the extended limits of confinement, that would have an immediate impact on the population in terms of no longer being in a prison facility. However, some of the other changes in terms of the credits, they will have longer term impact as offenders serve their sentences. In terms of the prison population right now, we're looking at around 32,000. The backlog has been reduced substantially. The backlog at its highest was around 1,800 inmates, and it is now back around 400 inmates. So as with the pandemic ongoing and everything still in flux, the data that we're going to be using for our next set of projections will continue to be impacted by COVID-19. And we've already been meeting with Nicole Sullivan and her team to discuss potential changes in data, additional data we might need, as well as additional changes to the approach that we use to try to account for this as best we can and try to produce as accurate a projection as possible. And we also plan to have this completed within our normal time frame. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Jenny. My expanded agenda acknowledges that there was time allotted until a minute ago for this presentation. However, we've not recognized Chief Deputy Secretary and fellow Commissioner Tim Moose. So I'll call upon him at this time. I guess first I'll just ask, thank you, Jenny. Based on this update that Jenny has provided, Tim, did you have any takeaways from that?
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jenny. We certainly appreciate it. Just a couple of things. I think overall right now, our prison population is at the point that it was in about the year 2000. And looking back historically, and I know the staff can probably provide, a better context to that than I can, but it's the lowest that I remember since a really long time ago. To give a little bit of update to Jenny's numbers, this morning's prison population as of 8 a.m. was 30,985. So with 400 on the backlog, it's a significant population reduction. There have been 14,630 releases so far this year. And the extended limits of confinement population, by the end of today, there will have been 516 individuals released or transitioned onto ELC. So I think, the system has definitely adjusted and responded to COVID. There are a lot of things that the prisons has done to try to manage that. The population is at a point that I don't think any of us could have anticipated where it is now. So for Jenny and Michelle and the staff, good luck trying to figure out a projection to help us out for next year. I'm not exactly sure how we can do that, but I know y'all will do the great work that you always do. So again, thank you very much. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have, Judge, or anyone has, or if there's additional context that I can put around where we are, I'll be glad to.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone have any questions about that? I see, Susan, your hand is up. If you'll unmute yourself.
Can you hear me? I will be really short. First of all, to Jenny, I want to compliment you, because if you could have predicted it, that's called prophecy. So the fact that you diverted from me, no, I'm serious. That means that your projections are very scientifically solid. This was an event nobody could have predicted. Number two, what will be interesting in projecting, like, let's say 2 years and on, whether the department and some other components of government will choose to keep some of the remedial steps that they adopted now. And so that will be, again, very challenging, but that will be an option for corrections to look at what they have, the space and so on, and maybe keep some of those practices and make them into the norm. So it's exciting time, probably hard for you to predict them. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. At this point, we're going to move on, and I'm going to recognize Tamara as a staff, Tamara Flincham, our staff member, who's going to present to us on juvenile resource projection updates that will then include a presentation by Deputy Secretary William Lassiter, who's joined us in this meeting process, and he'll have a separate presentation to make. So we'll look forward to Billy's presentation as well. But at this time, I'll recognize Tamara.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you, Judge Brown. Good morning. I am going to share my screen. Let's see. So commissioners, in the packet that was mailed to you should have received a copy of the document that you're hopefully seeing at this point. I'm going to talk about the youth development population projection update. Similar to what we just did with the adult system, we wanted to provide an update for you for the same type of update for the juvenile justice system. We're going to look particularly at the Youth Development Center population and our projections and how we did. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, let's see, for you. And there were two things that impacted the YDC population this past fiscal year 2020. One of those events that impacted the population we knew about and planned for, and that was the Raise the Age initiative that went into effect halfway through the fiscal year, and that was the increase in the age of juvenile jurisdiction to include most 16 and 17-year-olds as they commit offenses in the juvenile, that they would fall under the juvenile system. So that event we did take into account for with our projections. Obviously, what we just heard about with the adult system, the other event that affected the population was the COVID-19 pandemic. And clearly we didn't anticipate it, and that was not accounted for in our projection. And as we look at the numbers, you'll be able to see, I'm pretty confident that we're looking at the lowest YDC population numbers that we've ever seen. So this first graphic kind of looks at the first, second, and fifth year of our projection. You can see for the first year, we projected 187 bed need. The average June population was 151, the difference of 36. Where we're at currently, we're already in the second quarter of this fiscal year, first quarter of the second year, sorry, this fiscal year 2021. You can see that the average August population was 146 juveniles on average. I will point out that but all of these numbers are below the YDC capacity. One of the things or a couple of things that the pandemic does affect that's important, and I think Jenny mentioned as well, the pandemic affected juveniles going into the system with all of the court's closures, and then it also affected the release of juveniles. That also impacts the length of stay. These are all key components that will affect the accuracy of the projection as we try to predict or project where things will be going in the future. I'm going to not talk a whole lot about that because I think Deputy Secretary Lassiter will be kind of addressing some of that when he speaks in a few minutes. But this next graphic, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's just a different way to look at our projections, looking at the high population, the low, and where we fit in that. Similar to what you saw in the adult, I wanted to have you look at the average population by month. And you can kind of see the juvenile trends. We were having this up and down kind of thing going on with the juvenile population. I don't have data for this, but we would have normally seen an increase here based off of our little trends we have going for the past 5 fiscal years. I suspect the system was in preparation. I have no data for this, for the Raise the Age initiative. And we do see a little bit of an incline, but then you see the drastic decrease after the pandemic hit in March. I want to look at, similar to what was provided before, this graphic takes into account those 2 events that occurred for juveniles that impacted the YDC population. you see that the raise the age happened in December. It went into effect December 1st. And then this focusing on these orange lines, the dashed line represents this expanded population, or the 16 and 17-year-olds. And it takes a couple of months. It went into effect. We start to see some juveniles in the system. These are averages over the each month. And then the pandemic hits. I'd like to point out for this population, though, it did continue to increase despite the pandemic. We also, at the December meeting, provided a breakdown of the expanded population, and this dashed line up here is the kind of old school population, the juveniles under 16 when they commit their offense. But we had estimated 11-bed need for the first year for this population, the expanded population. You see that the average in June was 13. We had estimated, you can see that the under 16 continued to decrease during the pandemic. We had estimated that there would be a 170-bed need for this fiscal year of June 2020, and you can see that the average was 138. Not quite as accurate with those projections, but we didn't know about the pandemic. We have already received data from the staff at Juvenile Justice for fiscal year 2020 that we'll use for moving forward in the 2021 through 2026 5-year projection. We're going to put our collective minds together and hope that we come up with an accurate projection that we can present to you, hopefully in our next meeting in December.
Thank you, Tamara. At this time, I'm going to recognize Deputy Secretary Billy Lassiter. He's going to continue with a presentation on resource projections as an update for our gathering.
Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. I see that we're a little behind schedule, so I'll move quickly through these slides, but wanted just to build off of what Tamara just presented to you guys and kind of give you some of the variables. And as Tim said, this is a tough year to predict and obviously an unprecedented year to predict. And for juvenile justice, there's two major events that are going on. You've got the pandemic, and then you've got raise the age on top of that. And so it is just a really unprecedented year for predicting YDC projections, but also just predicting projections for all of our resources in juvenile justice. So I just wanted to show you a couple of quick slides, and I'll move through these quickly, but I'll make sure that I think I've already sent this to Michelle so she can send it out to the group and be glad to take any questions that people have. But this shows you the first slide here just shows you how dispositions have decreased during the pandemic. So just the number of dispositions that have been entered on juveniles have dropped from 3,220 down to 2,534. That's a 21% decrease in the population of dispositions that have been entered. And this only looks at the most serious event for each of those dispositions. So a juvenile is only counted once, even if they had multiple dispositions that were entered on a particular day. The next slide kind of shows you, we call it the broken teeter-totter here, because typically what you see with YDC is that there's a back and forth between exits and commitments. And each year it seems like one goes above the other one. And this year, because of the pandemic, we've seen that those numbers have kind of switched up a little bit, and we don't have that big decrease that you typically have. And so you can see that the number of commitments, as Tamara was talking about, is down, and that's mainly because court has not been in session to enter those dispositions for commitments. The next one that you can see here is length of stay, and I think this is really interesting. Although our exits and our commitments are trending the way that they're trending, we're also seeing that the length of stay is up. And so what would cause that during this pandemic, you might wonder? And I think it's mainly because we really removed the kids from the system that were the lower level offenses. We tried to get them out of the juvenile justice system, out of those YDCs. And so all the kids that we could move to community commitments or to community-based programs, we did that. So the kids that are remaining in the system, they are truly the high-risk kids that are in the system now. And so we've seen a increase in length of stay. And the other thing that's kind of driving that is the kids that did not have a safe place to go back to or were in DSS custody, we found that DSS and the parents themselves were saying, we have COVID at our house right now. We don't really think this is a safe environment for the kid to return to. So the system was struggling to try to figure out where was the best place to move some of those kids out of the system. But we did remove a lot of juveniles out of the system early on in the pandemic. The ones that remain tend to be those very serious offenders. And so they're high risk, high needs, and are typically staying a little bit longer. The overall crime rate, and I think this is really interesting, as we finally have gotten into the 16 or 17-year-old population, last year our overall crime rate for the under 16-year-old population was 15.43 per 1,000 juveniles in the state of North Carolina. And you can see that that rate has actually dropped for the under 16 population. We continue to see that crime rate go down for the under 16 population. It's down now to 14.89, which is the lowest we've ever tracked for the under 16-year-old population. But then you add in the 16 or 17-year-olds, and they're at 44.42, which is significantly higher than the under 16-year-old population. And then when you factor in both those populations together, you're up to 16.78. So that puts us higher than last year, but that's only because the raise the age population was entered into the system. And so the under 16 population continues to decrease. This next chart kind of shows you the YDC commitments and exits as we were going through COVID. And you can see in that April, May time period, we were really working hard to get kids out that were eligible to get out of committed status. We were working as hard as we possibly could to get them into community commitments and other resources. And that's why you can see that huge increase in the number of exits that were occurring. But commitments fell off the chart in April and May, only 5 in the whole month of April. And so that's a real low point for us. But you can see as court has started to come back into session now, the commitments are shooting back up. And I can tell you that we have quite a big backlog in our detention system, waiting on court hearings to occur across the state. And so we know as courts are starting to kick back into action now, that we think that commitment rate will return to what we saw earlier before the pandemic started. This chart kind of shows you the overall capacity, and just to show you that it truly is an unprecedented event. How those numbers have dropped off the chart there. You can see in those last few bullet points, or the last data points there, that this population has definitely decreased below what we would typically anticipate for a YDC population. So what do we had to do as far as capacity is really interesting. We're trying to make sure that we have flexibility in what we're doing across the state. And so I think when I presented to you guys in December, we talked about that we were converting one of the units at Cabarrus, the Youth Development Center, to a detention bed facility. And we've actually held off on that right now. But that's because we've been able to open up YDC beds at CA Dillon. They've opened 20 additional beds there for detention. And they're also going to bring another 30 beds in at CA Dillon to hire additional staff so that we can have additional detention beds there. That's where we've seen the population really grow in our state, is in that detention population. And that's mainly because the 16 or 17-year-olds that are being automatically transferred to the adult system are sitting in detention waiting on a superior court disposition. And so they're not going to YDCs because they're getting transferred to the adult system. But until that transfer occurs and they've actually been convicted and sentenced in the adult system, they're staying with us in a juvenile detention center. So that population is growing a lot. And so we've actually had to convert some of our YDC beds that are currently in the system to detention beds so that we can house that population and maintain social distancing in those detention facilities. Just a couple last slides here that I want to show you. This one shows you the overall complaint trend. I think this one is fascinating. It really shows you a true comparison to the last year to this year. So the blue line that's going across the center of that chart shows you the number of complaints that were filed last year against all juveniles. And remember, last year that was only with kids under the age of 16. And so you can see that blue line in comparison to what we've gotten in this year. And so in January, we started out really strong as far as the number of complaints that were coming into the system. And so you can see the orange line there actually compares the old population, the under 16-year-old population, with what the complaints were coming in last year. And we were slightly above that rate starting out the year. The gray bar shows you the raise the age population, this new 16 or 17-year-old population. So that shows you the new population that's coming into the system. And so you would anticipate the blue line would match up with the orange bars on this chart. And you can see in the April and March and May time period that those numbers dropped dramatically. In fact, in May, the combined population, the under 16-year-old population and the 16 or 17-year-old population combined, did not match the number of complaints coming in for the whole for the juvenile population last year. So that is significantly lower than what we would anticipate because of COVID. And one of the big driving factors of that is school-based offenses. School's not in, so therefore you don't have any school-based offenses. And so you can see the chart here shows you the number of school-based offenses that occurred the year before. That's the light blue color that's on there. And the dark blue color shows you where we are in the current year. And so there's been basically no school-based offenses since March. And that is 40% of the juvenile complaints that come into the system. So when you remove those school-based offenses from the system, it obviously has a significant effect on the system overall. And so this chart really bears that out. And one last chart that kind of shows you that is this chart that we've got here that shows you that as we've reduced those school-based offenses, which tend to be lower level offenses, misdemeanors, and even some status offenses, the number of serious offenses have grown as a percentage of the complaints coming in. I don't think that's because the population is changing as a whole. I think it's because we're eliminating some of those lower level offenses from being tracked because the kids aren't in school, and because they're not being able to commit those offenses on a school campus. You're seeing that those numbers are dropping. So the serious offenses are coming in as a bigger portion of the overall population. These bullet points I won't go through because I know we're pressed on time here, but I do want to let you know that we have put in place a lot of steps to really try to make sure that we have social distancing in our youth development centers. On our website, we have a 24-point plan that we've put in place to really encourage social distancing. And one of those major factors was trying to get kids out early and doing post-release supervision with those juveniles and putting in a community-based programs. And so we've taken a lot of steps across the state to try to make sure that we have not had an influx of COVID into our facilities. And I'm pleased to report we haven't had a single YDC kid come down with COVID. And that's because of the steps that we have taken in our youth development centers that I'm really proud of our staff for putting in place. And in our detention centers, we've only had 2 cases, and both of those were cases where kids were already infected when they came into the facility. When we did the test, they tested positive when they walked in the door, but we were able to prevent that spread to any of the other juveniles in the facility. So the steps that we've taken have worked, and we're really proud of the work that our staff have put into it and made sure that they've taken the proper precautions to prevent those the spread of COVID in our facilities. So just an overall picture to kind of wrap up here. We've seen a 31% reduction in status offenses. You might expect that. One of our biggest status offenses is truancy. Not a lot of truancy complaints coming in right now since kids aren't in school. And so those status offenses have dropped off tremendously. But we have seen an 18% increase in distinct juveniles on electronic monitoring. So this is a way that we try to monitor kids and keep them out of confinement. So we've seen a huge increase in that, the use of electronic monitoring. And then finally, since December 1st, we have seen a 46% increase in overall delinquent complaints. And so you may remember when we were talking about raise the age, we were thinking that that was going to be right around 60%. And so considering all the other factors that have gone into this with raise the age and the pandemic, to be that close is pretty good, actually, I think. And so I really want to thank Michelle and Tamara and all her staff that have worked with us over the years to develop those projections and make sure that we were ready for Raise the Age and had the proper staffing and the proper resources across the state. And I think that what these numbers bear out is that if we didn't have a pandemic, I think we would have nailed it exactly. But we're very close, even with the pandemic, to being right on those projections. So thank you very much, Judge. I appreciate the time.
Wow, Deputy Secretary, thank you so much. What a info-filled presentation, and because gives us lots of layers to YDC resource projections. But so it's right back at you with your thanks to Tamara and Michelle and other staff. We appreciate your partnership and bookending this presentation. I did have kind of a clarification. Don't know that merits being called a question. And you use the word complaint. You're talking, for those of us that are actually in that courtroom, about petitions. It got to that formal level of a petition. That's the equivalent of your use of the word complaint. I see you nodding.
Correct.
All right.
Yes,
and so obviously, yes, with COVID being the elephant in the room, influencing a lot of these trends, school-based offenses being driven to oblivion because of non-convening. But what I'm hopeful for is that we see a sharp decline. Whether it maintains at this low level is unlikely, but with the juvenile justice school-based partnership and these diversions that just that drive that rate down, the complaint rate down that you've seen. And I understand your explanation, but maybe there'll be a new explanation for it staying down in the future.
absolutely. That is the hope. And we are hoping for that to occur. And I will tell you that we're up to 38 jurisdictions now that local education agencies that do have a school justice partnership in place. And so we are making a lot of progress on that. And I agree with you. I think that will drive that population down moving forward.
Excellent. And then the other challenge that was a part of your presentation that I would just highlight is the need to reallocate YDC beds to using them for secure custody. And that's just a fact. I mean, I bristle every time you use the word courts have been closed. But I understand that really what you're talking about is these transfer hearings and the fact that trials are not convening in any significant way. We've been having delinquency court, and certainly have secure custody review hearings and first appearances and other pretrial issues, but a lot of the disposition tail off is explained by COVID and the limits of virtual hearings as opposed to in-person hearings. But yes, the juvenile equivalent of the jail backlog, right? The moratorium that was a part of Jenny's presentation on DAC. The backlog, if you will, in secure custody is an issue, and it's one you're addressing. And I think that is much needed, and I don't know that there's going to be any real quick fix on that. That's just going to be a fact, with or without COVID.
Yes, sir. You're absolutely right. And I apologize for my terminology of closed. Actually, the courts have been a great partner with us as far as doing teleconferencing between secure custody and the courts. And I really appreciate the courts across the state stepping up and allowing us to do that. That's allowed us not to have to transport kids to court and reduce the possibility of COVID getting into our facilities. Y'all been great partners. So thank y'all so very much for that.
Thank you, Billy. We're now going to transition to statewide misdemeanor confinement program projection update. And so we're going to begin with my turning it over to Rebecca Dial.
Good morning. It's really good to see everyone, albeit virtually. See if I can get this going here. So as a reminder, everyone who is in the statewide misdemeanor confinement program is a misdemeanor sentenced to an active sentence of 90 days or more, and all DWI offenders. Counties all have to send offenders to the SMCP. However, they do not have to choose to receive inmates from other counties. So when we think about, it is a voluntary program. However, if the SMCP does not have capacity, misdemeanors would be sent to prison. And so that's why it's important to think about, the impact of the SMCP and its capacity limits. So what you'll see here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, is the actual capacity was 916 on June 30th. This is about 450 bed difference than what we had projected. So we were off by a minimal 33% in our projections this year. Would note that the highest capacity was just over 1,400 in fiscal year 2020 and dropped to 755. Its lowest, I believe, was in April. And really saw the capacity drop off from February to March, but saw the population decline in April, May, and then June by over 100 in each of those months. It was a little steadier of a drop off. And then we've seen a slight increase now at the end of July of 2020 is up to 923. The population was still very low at 625. You'll see that the orange dotted line and blue dotted line of the chart show the projections. Scenario 1, as a reminder, was about counties that are building new facilities, have new beds coming online, but we're unsure about SMCP participation or about the exact number of beds they would be contributing, were counted as adding 0 new beds. And scenario 2 was taking into account that if they weren't sure about the number of beds, but were already SMCP receiving county participants, we assumed that they would contribute the same percentage as they already were in terms of new beds. So you see that in 2024, that's 2023 and 2024 are the two with different figures for the projection. So wanted to lay that groundwork, remind you of where we were with the projections, kind of give you a visual representation of the SMCP currently, and then turn over to Jesse for a little bit of information about the operational impacts of COVID-19.
Thank you, Rebecca. And we will now recognize the Sheriff's Association has a coordinator. You've met him before. It's Jesse Scholler, and he's going to partner up with Rebecca in this presentation on capacity for the statewide misdemeanor confinement program. Jesse?
Thank you, Judge, and thank you, Commission. I appreciate y'all letting me talk today. Hope everybody can hear me okay. So, yeah, so most of the issues that are going on with the SMCP, and I say issues, but I mean that decline in population are kind of mirror the prison and youth projection numbers as well. A lot of the decline in admissions are coming from the reduction in cases that are being brought in front of the court. But I do want to address the big reduction in capacity. That big reduction in capacity has come from receiving counties choosing to place a temporary suspension on receiving new inmates. And those suspensions are temporary. They have put those in place in order to reduce, new inmates coming into their facilities, because it's important to note that the SMCP operates on a voluntary basis. These sheriffs are volunteering these beds into the program. So therefore, if they want to put a pause on it, again, they have the option to do so. So while we see that big reduction in capacity, we don't anticipate it to stay that way. And already we went from a high of, I think, 24 or 25 counties with a suspension to this current month, July, to 19. So 5 or 6 have come back online. We anticipate more to come back online. Some have indicated whenever phase 3 is implemented by the governor, they plan to bring their beds back online. Some other ones have brought beds back online because they feel that they have got the procedures in place in order to handle any sort of outbreak that may happen. So we definitely anticipate the capacity going back up. As far as the population, we're looking at numbers that are akin to those before pre-2015, before DWIs were implemented into the program. So there was definitely a steep drop off. That's important to remember that SMCP houses misdemeanants, and those misdemeanants often serve shorter sentences, and therefore, whenever this decline in admissions happened, sentences were beginning to be completed, and so that's why you have a much steadier decline, and then it's kind of starting to level off, kind of at the 600-ish numbers now. But so that's just the general gist of what's going on. I remember telling Rebecca last year that I did not envy her position in trying to project all of these numbers, and I certainly don't envy her position now, but I think that her and the commission are doing a really great job, and I just applaud them for their efforts. So if anybody has any questions as to specifics, I'll be happy to try to answer whatever I can.
I would open the floor if anyone has a question either for Rebecca or Jesse. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Rebecca.
Judge.
Thank you, Tammy. They're auto-muting me. I don't know what that means, but somebody is auto-muting the chairman. I was expressing appreciation to Rebecca and Jesse, as well as the other presenters, on moving us along, because the roll call took some time. So we're close to being on schedule, and we are at this sweet spot of the agenda here at the end, where we're going to get into a presentation that will include one of our own commissioners as well as staff. We're going to review and discuss the Task Force on Racial Equity in Criminal Justice, and specifically what role the Sentencing and Policy Advisory Commission may play in that task force. So at this time, I'm going to recognize Becky Whitaker, who will begin our discussion. Becky.
Thank you, Judge Brown. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share some content as well. So before we get into a discussion of your role in the Racial Equity Task Force, I wanted to just give you an overview of it so that you will have an idea of what they're doing, how they're structured, that kind of thing. So let me share. Okay, so I'm going to provide an overview of the newly formed Governor's Task Force on Racial Equity and Criminal Justice. This new task force was established by Governor Cooper in June by Executive Order 145. If you're interested in reading the full executive order, it is 145. It's an advisory task force, and it reports to the governor. It is tasked with developing and implementing solutions that will eliminate disparate outcomes in the criminal justice system for communities of color. So what does the task force look like? So all the members and the chairs are appointed by the governor. The two co-chairs of this task force are Justice Anita Earls of the Supreme Court and Attorney General Josh Stein. Including the co-chairs, there are 25 members total. The executive order states that the membership shall include representatives from the Department of Justice, the Department of Public Safety, the judicial branch, district and superior court judges, district attorneys and public defenders, organizations or individuals that represent or advocate for members of marginalized communities, including communities of color, Latinx, American Indian, and LGBTQ populations. It also includes justice-involved individuals, victim advocates, chiefs of police, sheriffs, members of the General Assembly, local elected officials, and other appropriate representatives from local and state government, academic institutions, and research or advocacy groups. So you can see that there is a wide range of individuals that are contributing to the work of this task force. Our very own Sheriff Clemens, as Judge Brown mentioned, Sheriff Clemens has been appointed to the task force, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. As for the staffing, the task force is staffed by the Governor's Office, the Attorney General's Office, and Justice Earl's office. There's also a project manager from the Department of Justice. In addition to staff, the task force has developed a list of experts on topics relevant to their work for consultation. These experts often attend meetings, and they're there to either give presentations on topics that they are the experts in, or they're there just to field questions that the task force members may have. There is also a data team for this task force. The data team is there to assist the task force with exploring and developing requirements for data production and reporting, and to respond to data requests from the task force. And Michelle and Jenny on Sentencing Commission staff are members of the data team, so they are very well versed in the work that the data team is doing kind of behind the scenes. The mandate of the task force is set forth by the executive order. Their mandate is to develop evidence-informed strategies and equitable policy solutions that address the structural impact of intentional and implicit bias while maintaining public safety for at least the following areas: law enforcement practices and policies, and criminal justice practices and policies. So the task force's duties are also set forth by the executive order. The executive order lays out kind of what the task force is going to do in order to meet their mandate. So they are to consult with local, state, and national criminal justice experts and people with relevant experiences. As I previously mentioned, they have developed a team of experts for consultation. And then they're also to collaborate with and promote the research and solutions developed by relevant commissions, councils, and programs to the extent their work intersects with the mission and purpose of the task force. So of those relevant commissions, councils, and programs, one of the named commissions in the executive order is us, the Sentencing and Policy Advisory Commission. In addition to the Sentencing Commission, the other groups named in the executive order are the State Reentry Collaborative, the School Justice Partnership, the Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission, the Sheriff's Education and Training Standards Commission, the Commission on Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the Criminal Justice System, the Justice Academy, the Governor's Crime Commission, and the newly formed Center for the Reduction of Law Enforcement Use of Deadly Force. And these groups are strongly encouraged to consider and report on racial and ethnic disparities in their work, which means that we are strongly encouraged to consider and report on racial and ethnic disparities in our work. The task force has established 4 working groups, and they've assigned the members of the task force into one of these 4 working groups. Working Group 1, their focus is law enforcement management. Their issues for consideration are the recruiting and retaining of a diverse and racially equitable workforce, law enforcement training to promote public safety and build community support, law enforcement accountability and culture, and the enhancement of the law enforcement profession. Working Group 2 focuses on policing policies and practices. Sheriff Clemens is on this particular working group. Their issues for consideration include the use of force, investigations, community policing, pre-arrest diversion and other alternatives to arrest, the appropriate use of school resource officers, reimagining public safety, and reinvesting in communities. Working Group 3 is focused on court-based interventions to end discriminatory criminalization. Their issues for consideration include pretrial release and bail practices, charging decisions, the juvenile justice system and the school to prison pipeline, racial equity training for the court system personnel, including judges, DAs, and public defenders, and decriminalization or the lessening of criminal penalties. And then finally, working group 4 is focused on advancing racial equity in trials and post-conviction. Their issues for consideration include criminal trials, the use and impact of fines and fees, death penalty and sentencing disparities, reinstating parole, redress for long-term sentences and second look laws, prison discipline, and the collateral consequences of conviction. So how often are they meeting? What are they ultimately working on? What are they ultimately doing? Well, the full task force has met 3 times so far. Their next meeting is scheduled for October, and in between full task force meetings, the working groups meet. And the working groups have mostly been meeting approximately once a week, each of them. So they've really been doing a lot. All of their meetings have been virtual so far via Zoom, and they're live streamed on the Attorney General's YouTube channel in the event that you're interested in watching. And they're also posted there after the fact for anyone who wants to go back and watch meetings that have already occurred. They have also held virtual listening sessions and virtual public comment sessions. The task force's public policy recommendations require a simple majority vote of the task force members who are present, and their ultimate deliverable is a report, and they're to submit a report with recommendations on implementation due to the governor no later than December 1st of this year. So it's a fairly quick turnaround for a report of this magnitude. And then after that December 1st deadline, the task force is to meet at least quarterly, and they're to submit reports and recommendations at least annually.
I would invite other commissioners to participate in a response to Luther's concern. I see Art's hand, so I'll recognize Art.
Muted. Thank you very much, whoever unmuted me. I'll just comment to Luther's comment. I think this is, well, first of all, I think this is long overdue, and I think 20 years is too long to study this. I think we need to study it again. I don't know what it's going to show, as nobody would know what it would show, but I will tell you that a recent study by the United States Sentencing Commission, post-Booker, showed that disparity went up when they moved away from structured sentencing in the federal system. And it moved up significantly in the last couple of years when the judges were allowed to use the guidelines in the sentencing from the U.S. Sentencing Commission, were allowed to use them as advisory versus mandatory. So I think that, Luther, I think that it might allay some of your concerns. I'm not sure that's what you were talking about, because I think structured sentencing actually works to try to make sure that there is not disparate sentencing. But I do think we need to study it. Thank you, Your Honor. And whenever that discussion is over, I would like to know what structure this discussion, this study is going to be taking place. Is it going to be totally a staff study? Is it going to be a study group? Those are the questions I have on that. And Michelle, you can go ahead and be back.
All right. I saw Susan's hand. Dr. McMurray, did you also have a question? You're on my, some reason you're on my panel, but I'm going to recognize Susan at this point.
Thank you, Judge. Can you hear me? First of all, I worked on that report, and then Michelle and I talked about it quite recently. First of all, my very strong recommendation would be yes. I'm not sure how much we can prepare for the task force, so as a possibility, you might want to consider doing a first phase, just a quick statistical one for the task force, but maybe continue on the thoughts of what to do. Luther, who has been on the commission longer than I have, I want to protect structured sentencing too, but that's not, in my view, the primary goal of the commission. So I don't think that structured sentencing would be affected for it. But if it would and it's the right thing to do, I can deal with that. But the last thought I wanted just to share is that some of the findings, actually, quite a few of them pointed to things that happened before the sentencing. For example, the area, the county, or the judicial district in which you were was actually one of the strongest variables that predicted the kind of disposition. Habitual felon laws, which changed quite a bit since then, were one of the big considerations. Justice reinvestment was not a dream at the time yet, so that changed a lot. A lot of what is happening is also in the plea process and what you're charged with and what kind of the reduction you get. And we always said in that report too, a reduction from felony to misdemeanor is your best protection of all the various possible disparities. That happens pre-sentencing. So I wouldn't worry. I'm sure sentencing has an effect too, but I would not worry that that would be the main one and therefore the main target to recommend changes for. But my vote is very much yes.
Thank you. Of course, I'm not soliciting motions from the floor. It is about consensus, but I get your point, Susan. Thank you. And I would say trial attorneys are notoriously poker-faced, and we have Commissioner Weed and Elder and now Granados who have been that way, just stoically poker-faced throughout our meeting. But during your comments, Susan, they were giving these knowing, insightful, knowledgeable nods that I am taking as an understanding of some of your comments and encouragement of moving forward with this study. I would recognize it's 11:58, but I don't want to cut off if somebody else has an observation or a question. Any other?
Yes.
All right, I see Dr. McMurray's hand this time. Dr. McMurray.
Yes, I strongly support this effort on the part of the Sentencing Commission. I think the question is, so what would be the focus to fit the time frame? But I think a trend analysis from say 2002 or whenever the first report was done to current, I think would be helpful. And I agree completely with Susan to include the plea process because I mean that's part of the gate, so to speak. So I really think this would be a great opportunity for the Sentencing Commission to make its mark, so to speak, in terms of race and justice.
Thank you, Dr. McMurray. I saw Commissioner Weed's hand go up. A comment or question? Patrick.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just typed my comment in the chat that I do strongly recommend we move forward with the study. Thank you.
I've seen again during Dr. McMurray's comments more heads nodding that I'm taking as consensus. So please speak up because we want to hear all sides here. If there are other concerns to be registered. All right. Michelle, any other formality that you would organize for me to convene at this point other than me declaring there's been a consensus? I understand, Art, you've got some questions about the technical features of moving forward, as whether it's going to be through a subcommittee and what role, if it's just completely in staff's hands, and we can talk about that, but we're out of time on that point now. I'm just talking about consensus of staff moving forward. And I see no objections. So, Michelle, anything further on that?
No, that's great. We will proceed and can certainly follow up with individual commissioners, and feel free to email me any questions to set up a time to chat, or however you want to provide us input or feedback, or let us know if you have any thoughts. Would really appreciate that.
Excellent. Thank you. It's 12:01. I hear No other business in my ear because you've all muted.
Charlie, one question. What's the time frame?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
What's the
December.
time frame?
All right, so that's a good question.
Since it's going to start today, when is?
No. Some of the preliminary has already been underway. Staff has been working, but in order for a report to be presented consistent with the working groups, their deadline is 12/1 of this year. Now,
can our staff do that in that time?
Yes. Yes, sir. We're going to make that happen. Let it be noted, let the minutes reflect that Commissioner Moore is concerned about staff being able to prepare this report in a timely fashion.
Because if we don't have to put a deadline on them, we can put the deadline when we want it.
That's true. And you're right.
The
task force is you're right. The task force is underway for 2 years, and that's a good point. And I made it black and white that it has to be 12/1, and that's not the case. It's just a substantial update to the governor is going to be presented by the working groups on 12/1, and that does not have to be this report.
That would take a little pressure off our team.
Yes, sir. Duly noted. All right. No further business. You have in the chat comment section some interesting comments. I got a kick out of Representative Richardson. And I really appreciate everybody's participation. Of course, as always, my thanks to staff and our executive director. They do a marvelous job for all of us. And so you guys keep up the good work. This is difficult times. And I appreciate everybody's patience and remaining involved and tolerating the audio difficulties and RSVPing and logging in and all those things. So everyone, take care, enjoy the weekend, and we'll see you in December.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Be safe.
Take care.
Thanks, staff, especially.
Thank you.